There is a particular kind of silence that settles into a marriage long before anything officially ends. It doesn't arrive with arguments or slammed doors, and it doesn't announce itself with dramatic confessions or tearful breakdowns. Instead, it seeps in slowly, almost politely, disguising itself as routine, as tiredness, as the natural dulling that people like to call just another phase. I didn't recognize it at first. Most people don't. For 6 years, she was my life in the most ordinary, unremarkable way possible, and I mean that in the best sense of the word. We weren't a spectacle. We didn't perform happiness for others. We lived it quietly, privately, in a way that felt earned rather than borrowed. We met in our late 20s, when neither of us was still pretending to be someone else. She was organized, thoughtful, the kind of woman who planned 3 steps ahead but never made you feel controlled. I was steady, predictable, maybe even boring to some, but dependable in the ways that actually matter when life stops being theoretical and starts demanding consistency. Our relationship didn't burn hot. It warmed. We built habits instead of fantasies. Friday nights with takeout spread across the coffee table, both of us pretending we'd pick a movie quickly and failing every single time. Sunday mornings spent half awake, sharing coffee in silence, not because we had nothing to say, but because silence had become a shared language between us. When we argued, it wasn't explosive. It was methodical. 2 people who assumed there would always be a tomorrow to finish the conversation. And that assumption, that quiet certainty, is what makes everything that followed feel so cruel in hindsight. Because when the shift began, it didn't feel like a shift at all. It was subtle. Almost courteous. The first thing I noticed was her phone. Not because she was hiding it, not obviously, but because she started carrying it with her everywhere, even for things that didn't require more than a moment's absence. The kitchen. The bathroom. The hallway. Before that, her phone had lived wherever gravity placed it. On the coffee table. The couch. Sometimes forgotten entirely. I noticed the change, registered it, and then dismissed it. That's what trust does. It edits reality in favor of comfort. When she added a password to her phone, I asked about it casually, the way you ask about a new routine without suspicion. She smiled, said something about security, about being more careful these days, and her tone was calm enough that I felt slightly embarrassed for even asking. So I let it go. Then came the calls. They weren't frequent, and that was part of the problem. If they had been constant, I might have confronted them sooner. Instead, they appeared just often enough to be noticeable but not enough to feel alarming. Her phone would ring, she'd glance at the screen, and then she'd say the same phrase every time, spoken lightly, almost reflexively. "I'll just take this real quick." She would step out of the room, close the door behind her, and return minutes later as if nothing had happened. If I asked who it was, she always had an answer ready. Work. A friend. Someone who needed advice. Her voice never wavered. Her expression never betrayed her. And that, more than anything else, unsettled me. Distance crept in next, though I wouldn't have called it that at the time. Conversations shortened, not abruptly, but gradually, like sentences losing their endings. Topics that once invited discussion now closed themselves off before they had a chance to breathe. When I talked about the future, not dramatically, not with pressure, just in passing, she responded with vague affirmations that carried no weight. "Yeah, maybe. We'll see. Let's talk about it later." Later never came. I told myself it was stress. Work. Fatigue. Life doing what life always does, demanding more than people have to give. I reminded myself that long-term relationships don't stay in constant motion. They rest. They pause. But something about the pause felt intentional. The moment that finally cracked the illusion arrived on a day so ordinary it still irritates me when I think about it. She told me she was meeting a friend for coffee after work. There was nothing suspicious about that. She did it occasionally, and I never questioned it. That afternoon, I happened to be running errands nearby and, on impulse, thought it might be nice to surprise her. Just stop by, say hello, share a few minutes. When I arrived, she wasn't inside the cafe. She was outside, standing near the entrance, walking back and forth in short, restless steps, her phone pressed tightly against her ear. I stayed in my car. Not because I planned to spy on her, but because something in the way she carried herself stopped me. She wasn't relaxed. She wasn't chatting. She looked focused, almost tense, like someone mid-negotiation rather than mid-conversation. I didn't hear much. I didn't need to. It's almost ready, she said. And after that, we can start fresh. Those words landed with a weight that had nothing to do with their volume. They didn't sound like work. They didn't sound like friendship. They sounded like a conclusion. That night, she told me a completely different story. A detailed, casual account of her friend's relationship problems, complete with the kind of small, unnecessary details people add when they want a story to feel real. She didn't hesitate. She didn't trip over her words. She lied smoothly, and that terrified me more than anger ever could have. A few days later, she brought up our finances. It was framed as practicality, as responsibility, as something couples should do eventually. She suggested organizing all our account information in one place, passwords, documents, access. For emergencies, she said, shrugging lightly, as if the idea had just occurred to her. We had never talked about this before. Not seriously. What kind of emergencies? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. She shrugged again. Said it was just smart. Said life happens. Her logic made sense, and that was the problem. It was too polished, too rehearsed, as if she'd practiced saying it in a mirror before deciding it was time. That night, sleep refused to come. I lay there replaying moments I had dismissed, lining them up not emotionally, but logically, the way you do when you're trying to solve a problem you don't want to admit exists. The phone. The calls. The cafe. The money. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they formed a shape I didn't like. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I did something quieter. Instead of confronting her, instead of demanding answers I wasn't ready to hear, I chose to observe. There is a strange clarity that comes when you stop trying to fix something and start trying to understand it. I wasn't angry yet. I wasn't even heartbroken. What I felt was closer to a cold curiosity, the kind that settles in when a part of you senses danger but hasn't fully accepted it. The house didn't change. Our routines didn't change. She still kissed me when she came home. Still asked how my day was. Still laughed at the right moments. But something underneath it all had shifted, and once you feel that shift, you can't unfeel it. I started noticing how carefully she chose her words. How conversations ended the moment they drifted toward anything that implied permanence. How often she checked her phone now, not obsessively, but with intention, like someone waiting for updates rather than messages. I paid attention to what she didn't say. When people are lying about small things, they usually overcompensate. They explain too much. They fill silence with unnecessary details. But when someone is lying about something big, something already decided, they do the opposite. They simplify. They minimize. They reduce. That's what she was doing. A few days later, while she was at work, I logged into our joint account again. Not with the expectation of finding proof, but with the need to confirm that I wasn't imagining things. The movements were still there. Small transfers. Quiet withdrawals. Not enough to trigger alarms, but enough to indicate intent. It wasn't spending. It wasn't budgeting. It was positioning. I stared at the screen longer than necessary, feeling something settle in my chest that wasn't panic, but acceptance. I called my old college friend that afternoon. A lawyer. Someone who knew me well enough to tell when I was asking a question I already knew the answer to. I explained everything carefully, stripping emotion from the narrative, laying it out like evidence rather than confession. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, there was a pause on the line. "Look," he said finally, "I'm not saying she's definitely planning something. But if she is, the time to protect yourself is before papers are filed, not after." Protect yourself. That phrase echoed in my head long after the call ended. That evening, I sat at my desk alone. The house was quiet in a way that felt unfamiliar, even though nothing about it had changed. I opened my laptop and began going through everything: bank accounts, investments, documents tied to the house. Each file carried memories. Not sentimental ones, but practical ones. Late nights working extra hours. Decisions made together. Sacrifices neither of us had ever formally acknowledged, because that's what marriage often turns effort into: background noise. My hands shook, not because I was afraid, but because I didn't want this to be real. I wanted to be wrong. I wanted to close the laptop, go to bed, and wake up to a version of my life where I was simply overthinking things. But there was another voice inside me now. Quieter. Colder. The part of me that understood something had already shifted, whether I acknowledged it or not. Trust, I realized, doesn't mean ignoring reality when it starts whispering. That night I called my mother. I didn't tell her everything. I didn't need to. I asked her if she could help me hold on to some things for a while. I framed it as precaution. As something temporary. She didn't ask questions. She never has when it matters. She just said yes. Over the next few days, I moved quietly. I didn't drain accounts. I didn't leave obvious gaps. I transferred assets methodically, legally, into a trust under my mother's name. Cash. Investments. The house. Everything that represented years of work and shared life. I left enough untouched to keep everything looking normal. My wife noticed nothing. She came home, kissed my cheek, asked what I wanted for dinner. She suggested we watch something light. She laughed more than she had in months. That laughter unsettled me. It felt like relief. Like someone who believed the most difficult part of a plan was already behind her. For the next several days, I played my role carefully. I didn't change my behavior. I didn't ask questions. I didn't bring up finances again. She didn't either. At first, I thought that meant she had dropped the idea. That maybe I had overreacted. That maybe the shift I'd felt was temporary, something I had misinterpreted because I was too focused on details that didn't matter. But the longer she avoided the topic, the clearer it became. She wasn't dropping it. She was waiting. I caught her watching me more than once. Not openly. Just quick glances. Assessing. Measuring. As if she was trying to decide when the right moment would be. Whatever she was preparing for, she didn't want to rush it. 2 weeks passed. Then one Friday evening, she turned off the television, sat beside me on the couch, and said the words I had been expecting since the moment I stayed in my car outside that cafe. "We need to talk." Her voice was calm. Steady. Practiced. "I think we should get a divorce." There was no anger in her tone. No visible sadness. She spoke the way someone does when they've already had the conversation many times in their head and are simply delivering the final version. She talked about space. About needing to find herself. About losing her identity. I listened without interrupting. Then she said something that shifted the ground beneath everything she just told me. "I've made a lot of sacrifices for you," she said. "I deserve more." That sentence wasn't emotional. It was transactional. And suddenly, everything made sense. This wasn't about falling out of love. It was about reframing the past to justify the future. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I didn't ask questions. I nodded. "If that's how you feel," I said quietly, "we'll figure out the next steps." She looked surprised. Not relieved. Surprised. As if she had expected resistance. Emotion. Negotiation. Instead, she got acceptance. A few days later, the papers arrived. And they weren't about separation. They were about extraction. The papers arrived on a Monday morning, slid neatly into our mailbox as if they were nothing more than another piece of routine correspondence, another envelope among bills and advertisements, indistinguishable from the outside, yet heavy enough that my hands felt their weight before I even opened them. I already knew what they would say. Still, there is something deeply unsettling about seeing intention transformed into ink, about watching something you sensed in the air suddenly become official, structured, undeniable. Divorce papers don't scream. They don't accuse. They simply state. And in that cold clarity, they strip away any remaining illusions. She wasn't asking to leave. She was asking to take. Half the house. Half my savings. Half the assets. The car. And then, layered beneath it all, vague language about spousal support that made little sense given her income, but perfect sense if the goal wasn't fairness, only leverage. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time with the papers spread out in front of me, not reading them over and over, but letting them settle, letting my body absorb what my mind had already accepted. This wasn't impulsive. It wasn't emotional fallout. This was calculated. The woman I was married to had already left. What remained was someone negotiating an exit strategy. I didn't confront her. Not then. There was no value in confrontation anymore. Confrontation implies the possibility of change, and I understood, with a calm that surprised even me, that change was no longer on the table. This wasn't a conversation. It was the execution of a plan. We moved through the next few days like actors sharing a stage long after the play has ended, polite, distant, careful not to disturb the fragile illusion of normalcy that neither of us truly believed in anymore. She avoided discussions about the paperwork, as if speaking them aloud too soon might disrupt whatever timeline she had constructed in her head. I let her. The mediation was scheduled quickly. She arrived with her lawyer, a man whose confidence filled the room before he even spoke, carrying a binder so thick it felt performative, like a physical manifestation of how prepared they believed themselves to be. He spoke in measured tones, listing demands as if they were obvious, as if fairness was a given simply because he said it was. I listened. I said nothing. When it was finally our turn, my attorney slid a stack of documents across the table without ceremony, without drama, and without explanation. He let the papers speak for themselves. I watched her lawyer's expression change as he flipped through them. Confidence softened into confusion. Confusion tightened into concern. "What is this?" he asked, looking up. "These documents," my lawyer said calmly, "detail the transfer of all major assets into a trust under my client's mother's name." The transfers were completed several weeks prior to the divorce filing. The trust is legal, irrevocable, and fully compliant. The room went silent. I didn't look at her at first. I didn't need to. I could feel the shift beside me, the sudden tension, the sharp inhale that betrayed the moment her internal timeline collapsed. She took the papers from her lawyer's hands, flipping through them quickly, desperately, as if speed might change their contents. "This can't be real," she said. Then she looked at me. Her expression moved through disbelief, then anger, then something darker, something closer to fear. "You planned this," she said quietly. "You knew." I didn't answer. There was nothing left to clarify. Her lawyer tried to regain control of the situation, asked questions, searched for angles, but there were none. The dates were clear. The signatures were notarized. The structure was sound. What had felt, to her, like a sure thing had evaporated in a matter of minutes. The meeting ended without resolution. As we stepped into the hallway, she turned toward me, her composure cracking for the first time. "This isn't over," she said. "You're going to regret this." I met her eyes calmly. "I already regret trusting you," I said. "That's the only regret I have." After that, things unraveled quickly. The calls started first. Calm at the beginning. Rational. Almost apologetic. Voicemails suggesting we talk things through, that maybe everything had moved too fast, that misunderstandings happen. When I didn't respond, the tone changed. Accusations followed. Then anger. Then desperation. She swung wildly between blaming me for ruining her life and begging me to give her a chance to explain, as if explanation could somehow undo intent. My lawyer told me not to engage. I didn't need convincing. By then, silence felt like the only honest response left. When the calls stopped working, she tried something else. Stories. Mutual friends began reaching out, confused, cautious, carrying versions of events that didn't quite make sense. She told some people the divorce had been a misunderstanding, others that it was a test of our relationship. To a few, she claimed it had all been a joke that went too far. The stories didn't hold. Details contradicted each other. Timelines collapsed under simple questions. People began to notice. The truth surfaced slowly, the way it always does, carried not by confrontation but by quiet conversations between people who start comparing notes. And then, one evening, it arrived fully formed. A mutual acquaintance contacted me and asked to meet. When we sat down, he showed me screenshots. Messages exchanged between her and a man named Jake, the name I had heard before but never attached to a face. The texts were clinical. They weren't emotional confessions or romantic fantasies. They were plans, calculations, strategies. Once the settlement's done, we'll have everything we need. Don't back down. Make him feel guilty if you have to. He owes you. I stared at the screen, feeling something inside me go completely still. This wasn't heartbreak. This was confirmation. Jake disappeared shortly after everything fell apart. Whether he lost interest when the money vanished or simply moved on to the next opportunity didn't matter. What mattered was that the illusion he had helped construct collapsed the moment it stopped benefiting him. Without him, she lost momentum. Without momentum, she lost credibility. By the time the divorce was finalized, there was nothing left to argue over. She left with her personal belongings and a story that no longer convinced anyone. I stayed. With the house. With my savings. With a quiet that no longer felt threatening. In the weeks that followed, my mother came over with paint samples and gentle suggestions, as if helping me reclaim the space could somehow help me reclaim myself. And in a way it did. Now, when I sit alone in the mornings, coffee cooling beside me, the silence feels different. It isn't empty. It's honest. Some stories don't end with apologies. They end with understanding. And that, I've learned, is enough. Some stories don't end with apologies. They end with understanding. If this story felt familiar, you're not alone. Thank you for listening. This was Block Tales.